All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're looking at a truly fascinating microcosm of the impossible choices facing global leaders today in 2026. I mean, if you want to understand the absolute tightrope walk between high-flying environmental ideals and hard, on-the-ground economic realities, there's really no better case study than Swiss federal counselor Albert Rösti. We're going to unpack the incredibly complex, often totally contradictory decisions crossing his desk. Decisions that, as you'll see, have massive ripple effects way beyond Switzerland's borders. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the controversial counselor himself. Then dive into the climate target crisis, the push for a nuclear energy comeback, Geneva's role as a global AI governance hub, and finally, what all this pragmatism looks like in practice. Let's get to it. Part 1, the controversial counselor. So who exactly is Albert Rösti? Well, born in a small village in the Bernese Oberland, he's actually an agronomist by trade. He got his PhD in technical sciences from ET Zurich back in 1997. But today he wields immense power. Since taking office in January 2023, he's been heading up UVEC. That's the department controlling Switzerland's environment, transport, energy, and communications. Literally the most complex, highly sensitive portfolios in the entire country, all sitting squarely on his shoulders. And his underlying philosophy? It's perfectly captured by this quote: "Switzerland alone cannot influence the climate." You see, he's a deeply pragmatic, market-driven politician. He's even openly expressed doubts about whether the world can actually hit net zero emissions by 2050. His argument is essentially that Switzerland is already doing a ton with its recent legislation on CO2, climate innovation, and the circular economy. He always looks at the global impact through a highly localized, strict economic lens. But, as you might guess, that philosophy triggers some fierce pushback. Back in July 2026, Green Party President Lisa Mazzone demanded he be stripped of his environment portfolio completely. She flat out stated that literally any other minister would be better. Critics accuse him of dragging his feet and failing to protect people from extreme weather like heat waves. And this really sets up the central theme for our explainer today. Here is a leader operating right at the center of radical contradictions, constantly balancing strict financial pragmatism against urgent, screaming environmental demands. Which brings us to part 2, the climate target crisis, and specifically missing 2030. In August 2026, Rösti made a pretty striking admission. Switzerland is likely going to miss its 2030 climate target. Now, remember, this was a massive commitment to cut greenhouse gas emissions by half compared to 1990 levels. So, what's the roadblock? What is actually standing in the way of reaching this crucial milestone? Well, it comes down to this number, 300 to 400 million Swiss francs. That's a massive chunk of change. You see, a huge portion of Switzerland's CO2 reduction strategy actually relied on purchasing emissions certificates from abroad. But given the current, very strict budget context, Rösti simply doesn't see how the government can justify raising that kind of money. And without that funding, the country's net zero progress basically stalls out. It's a head-on collision between environmental ambition and cold, hard fiscal reality. And this next situation brilliantly illustrates just how volatile that collision can be. Right at the exact same time Swiss forests were suffering from extreme summer droughts, UVEC made the highly controversial decision to cut funding for climate-adapted forests. Now, from Rösti's perspective, his hands were tied. These are simply unavoidable budget constraints. But from the critic's perspective, it's an outrageous abandonment of environmental duty right in the middle of a crisis. It's an incredibly delicate, high-wire balancing act between keeping the nation's books in the black and protecting its natural resources. Moving to part 3. A nuclear energy comeback. Because while he's facing all this criticism on climate shortfalls, Rösti is aggressively pushing for carbon-free power somewhere else. At recent summits in Paris and with the International Energy Agency, he made the case that nuclear is absolutely indispensable for our low-carbon future. And let's be clear, nuclear power is not some fringe source in Switzerland. It currently accounts for roughly 27% of their electricity production. That's more than a quarter of the grid. Rösti sees this existing infrastructure as a foundational element. To him, it's the most practical way to guarantee energy security without pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere. But there is a massive hurdle here. After the Fukushima disaster, Swiss voters actually decided to phase out nuclear power, essentially banning new plants. Now, Rösti is framing the overturning of this ban as technological openness, and man, has that sparked a fierce debate in parliament. It is a classic political clash. You have the government pushing for long-term energy security on one side and an established democratic mandate, along with the inherent political risks of nuclear technology. So let's just pause here for a second. Why bring back nuclear power now? I mean, with all the incredible advancements in renewables, why spend precious political capital trying to overturn a nearly decade-old voter ban in 2026? The answer boils down to winter grid stability. Think about those freezing cold winter days up in the Alps. Solar power is pretty scarce, and the wind, often dead calm. Rösti's pragmatic argument is that without nuclear and hydropower acting as reliable baseloads, Switzerland would be forced to rely on highly polluting gas or coal plants literally just to keep the lights on and homes warm. For him, the math is simple. You just cannot have a reliable, low-carbon winter without nuclear energy. Okay, on to part 4, Global AI Governance Hub. Because Rösti isn't just focused on domestic power grids, he's actively positioning Geneva as the multi-stakeholder center for global AI governance, really pushing for a framework rooted in human rights following the AI for Good Global Summit. And he is certainly not wearing rose-colored glasses about this tech. He used that global stage to explicitly warn about the massive, very real threats posed by unregulated AI. We're talking arbitrary surveillance, rampant disinformation, and ultimately the undermining of our democratic institutions. This is exactly why he's so insistent that AI development must feature absolute digital transparency and traceability. Without that, public trust is just gone. To actually tackle this, he's already announced the next massive global AI summit scheduled for Geneva on June 21st and 22nd, 2027. And his vision here is operational governance. Not just a bunch of theoretical white papers gathering dust, but practical rules linking regulation directly to science and technology. And crucially, this is a big deal, he's focusing on ensuring robust participation from developing countries, making sure the rules of the future aren't just written by a handful of wealthy nations. Finally, part 5, pragmatism in practice. Look, managing energy crises and international AI summits requires immense stamina. And early 2026 really tested Rösti on a very personal level. In late April 2026, Rösti actually had to undergo urgent, medically necessary surgery for a genetic issue causing severe nerve pain. It required a lumbar vertebrae fusion. He spent May working from home, dialing into federal council meetings by phone, while Defense Minister Martin Feister acted as his deputy. But get this, by late May, he was physically back in the federal council. It really highlights his intense drive to get the surgery done quickly so he could return, as he put it, with full commitment to his massive departmental duties. And he didn't ease back into it. He jumped straight into a staggering workload. On the diplomatic front, he's holding meetings with both the Chinese and U.S. ambassadors, flawlessly executing Switzerland's traditional tightrope walk between major global powers. Domestically, he's pushing a highly market-driven revision to the Postal Act, aiming to save Swiss Post 45 million francs every single year starting in 2026 by introducing things like flexible delivery and shared mailboxes. Basically, if demand drops, services are reduced. It is textbook, unsentimental pragmatism. Which really leaves us with this final overarching thought. We're looking at a leader who warns of missing climate targets while cutting climate adaptation funds, who pushes for nuclear power in a country that banned it, and who champions AI human rights while demanding strict market efficiencies everywhere else. So I leave you with this question to ponder. Can true leadership in the modern world successfully govern by embracing these radical contradictions? Is this blend of climate pragmatism, nuclear ambition, and AI governance simply the inevitable face of modern leadership? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.